بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول رب العالمين وعلى آله الطاهرين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كلامه المجيد وفي فرقانه الحميد بعد أن أقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن جاءكم فاسق بنبأ فتبينوا وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قدر الله امرأ سمع منا شيئا فبلغه كما سمعه أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sorry for the little bit of late start, but alhamdulillah we had this technician to hand. MashaAllah, these practical skills really do benefit because as you can see, MashaAllah set everything up. So alhamdulillah, the first time I've got the screen working and we've got some visual aids to help us as we go through. This presentation, it's based on the book that we have, Tafsir Mustalah al-Hadith. But there's also extra things that have been added to it based on science of Hadith, what it actually entails, how we understand Hadith based on, in the light of the Quran, in the light of other Hadith, and the objections, not just by the classical scholars or people who came before, but the objections presented by contemporaries, such, for example, Joseph Shakhtar, etc. This was actually given to us by Sheikh Imtiaz Jamil from Blackburn. He provided us with this PowerPoint, alhamdulillah. Asked him and he delivered a similar course and he had all the slides ready. Well, I did add a few things and take a few things away. But Bismillah. So when we talk about science of Mustalah al-Hadith, we spoke about a few things in the first week. These are some questions that arise when people look at the Quran and look at the Sunnah. One is that the Sunnah does not have legislative authority. So how is it that the Sunnah can tell you something to do, like can tell you to do something that Allah didn't tell you to do? So how is it? Does the Sunnah have that same epistemological weight as the Quran? Does the Sunnah have the same authority as the Quran? How do we understand that? And then we answered by following Allah, following the Messenger of Allah is indeed following Allah, because the Prophet ﷺ, like the brothers mentioned last time, وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ, that he doesn't speak from his own desire, إِنْ هُوَ وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ, but it's a revelation that's revealed to him. And then the question was asked, is everything that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says, is everything that he says, is it authoritative in its nature? As in, do we have to act upon it? And then we said, based on the context, no, it really isn't. Because at times the Prophet ﷺ can say something from his own ijtihad or from his own sort of reasoning, right, or his own advice, but we don't really have to act on it. And we gave some examples. Well, Jarir and Barira, when Jarir, he broke up with his wife Barira, and then Jarir asked the Prophet ﷺ to intercede for him and the Prophet ﷺ went to his ex-wife Barira, and he asked her to take him back. And she asked, Hal amiram shafi', are you commanding me? Are you giving me some advice? And the Prophet ﷺ said, Shafi', and then she said, فَإِذَنْ لَا حَاجَةَ لِي بِهِ, then I don't want to take him back. And we gave another example in Sahih Muslim, where the people in Medina, they used to fertilize the crops in a certain way. And the Prophet ﷺ came and he said, don't do it in this particular way. And then the next year, the harvest didn't come out as it used to do. And then the Prophet ﷺ said these famous words, that أَنْتُمْ أَعْلَمُ بِأُمُورِ دُنْيَاكُمْ, that you are more learned in matters of your dunya. So it's not that the Prophet ﷺ tells us every single thing, but he is there to guide us in a way. So then these questions were asked, and then so the way of understanding it is understanding the hadith holistically in light of each other, not just understanding a single hadith and taking the single hadith. And we gave the analogy of a snapshot. So last time the brother was sitting there lying down a bit. So we said that if we take a picture of him, would people think he's in an usul al-hadith class? Not really. But then if we took a picture of all you brothers here, everyone here, then it would look more like a class. So in reality, hadith are like snapshots of reality that need to be understood in context and need to be understood in light of each other. And then another question on the slide, as you can see, in early Islam, the Sunnah was not recorded because the Prophet ﷺ forbade the writing of hadith. So this was an objection raised that during the early days, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تكتبوا عني إلا القرآن ولا تكتبوا عني غير القرآن سوى القرآن. That don't write from me except from the Quran. Because what used to happen is when the companions used to write the Quran down on different parchments, so what they would write the Quran down on anything that they had just to remember it and memorize it. And then at times what would happen is they would write their own tafsir as well along with the verses. So they would write an explanation of a particular difficult word, etc. And then some ishtibah happened where they used to sort of mix them together, and people found it hard to differentiate between the Quran and the explanation. So the Prophet ﷺ in the beginning said, don't write from me except the Quran. The explanations, my sayings, you write them afterwards, but not when the Quran is being revealed. And then there was a time when the Prophet ﷺ allowed them, when they became accustomed to the way on the methodology of the Quran, not the methodology, sorry, the way that the Quran is, the particular literary style that the Quran has, it's unique. Even the Arabs found it unique. So when the people became accustomed to it, then the Prophet ﷺ allowed them to write the hadith. So another question here is, fabrication of hadith was so widespread, the Muslim scholars were unfit for the task of scrutinizing hadith. We answered these questions in the previous sessions, where the scholars of the past, they had a particular grading system where what they would use to grade the hadith by, and they considered every single angle, every single aspect, and this is the whole reason why we're studying the science of Mustalah al-Hadith, the Hadith Nomenclature, how they graded the hadith, how they understood the particular nuances of hadith literature. So they did do an adequate job in formulating the system of isnad. We mentioned that Sufyan al-Thawri said, Muhammad ibn Sirin, who is a tabi'i, a scholar who came after the time of the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala alayhim ajma'in, he came after them, and he said that in the early days, no one used to ask, if someone narrated a hadith, it was more of a trust sort of thing. They would say, Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said this, but they wouldn't ask, okay, who did you hear it from? Did you hear it from a reliable source? They would just accept it as they said it. But later on, when heresy started, when different people started coming into Islam with their own ideologies that they had, and this new fitna started occurring, then people would ask, where did you get that from? And then we mentioned the importance of the system of isnad, the system of chain of narration, where I heard it from this person, heard it from this person, heard it from this person, heard it back from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This whole system that was formulated, this was formulated back in the early days. Who was the first scholar to write on this? Sheikh Muhammad? Imam Shafi in the Risala as well, but just on the science of Usul al-Hadith, when we mentioned a scholar. Is it gone? Okay. Ram Hurmuz in Rawi wal Wa'i. That was, and then we mentioned a few works, a few books that were written on the science of Usul al-Hadith. So they did do an adequate job of sort of formulating a science for scrutinizing hadith. So they formulated a science for scrutinizing the hadith chains along with the actual content of the hadith also. So then we have a contradiction as well. Hadith contains illogical and contradictory information and cannot be relied on. And then people asked a question last time as well about when a hadith contradicts logic, how do we understand that, right? And we were asked a question last time about إذا وقع الذباب في طعام أحدكم when what's the hadith? فَكُلُوهُ no فَانْقُلُوهُ, right? So the Prophet ﷺ mentions that if a fly goes into your food, right, the wing of the fly, then you take it out and you put the other wing in. So doesn't that contradict logic? And then we gave some answers regarding that. And then someone asked, doesn't the hadith about as-safr qita'atun min al-adhabi, the hadith in Bukhari, that traveling is a portion of punishment, doesn't that contradict the hadith? Does that contradict logic? Sorry. So is the hadith illogical? Did the Prophet ﷺ say things that contradicted logic and were obsolete? They ran out. They were no longer relevant. We answered these sort of questions. And then we have questions about the Orientalists. Sorry, remember it was about takabbur, about the swallowing one's pride. Remember? And then the one about safar was لأن فيه فراق الأحباب, because it's separation from one's beloved. So these are different ways of understanding it. that really don't lose relevance. They always will be relevant. So then we have that.
What's the difference between hadith and ahadith?
So hadith is the singular, ahadith is plural. So ahadith is just plural, hadith is singular word. Okay, some more objections here. The Quran contains everything a believer needs. So is the Quran enough for us? But the Quran in and of itself, we said that the Quran does mention and hint to certain things. For example, the Quran says aqimis salah, that pray salah. But the Quran won't tell you that for Fajr there's 2 rak'ah, for Dhuhr there's 4 rak'ah. The Quran won't tell you that. Quran won't tell you the method of your prayer. Quran will just tell you pray. So the actual main points are mentioned in the Quran, but we said that the Quran is mujmal. It's not ambiguous in nature, but it needs further explanation, and is complemented by the hadith. And the Quran in and of itself mentions that Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ati'u Allah wa ati'u Rasul. O you who believe, obey Allah and obey His Messenger. So in the Quran itself, it says to obey the Messenger, and obeying the Messenger is accepting what he said. So these were some objections that were asked. Okay, another thing is, for the first 150 years to 200 years after the death of the Prophet, no hadith was written. We mentioned that the reasons why. It was an oral tradition in the beginning. So people sort of, from their memory, they would narrate, or they would narrate from the Sahifa, from the books, and they would narrate from the students, but they would keep a track of who narrated from who. Is this person reliable? Does this person have a good memory, etc.? There was different criteria which we are going to mention. Another one, hadith is like Chinese whispers, right? What happens in Chinese whispers? Yeah, what happens in Chinese whispers?
Eventually someone's flag misses out.
Yeah, there's always like some masala added, some extra bits added. It just like makes it a bit more spicy, if this, this miscommunication kind of thing. So is hadith like that? And how was hadith saved from there? And the scholars do say the system of isnad is the secret of this ummah, that we know for sure that the Prophet ﷺ said this through the system that we have of isnad. And then here we have just an overview of the different things we talked about. We talked about the definition of sunnah hadith. It was the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ. Sunnah is the sayings, what the Prophet ﷺ did, what he approved of, and his characteristics, his shama'il. And mashallah, the brother here, Sheikh Muhammad, every fortnight, he goes through the character of the Prophet ﷺ. At the university, inshallah, whoever has time, they shall try and participate. But it's a book by Abu Isa at-Tirmidhi, who's one of the famous hadith scholars who noted all the different physical and spiritual characteristics of the Prophet ﷺ based on hadith. So every single narration in there has this chain of narration that was authenticated by the Imam himself. So sunnah includes all of these: his sayings, what he did, what he approved of, physical traits, his characteristics. And then we talked about the authority of sunnah. Sunnah is the second legislative source in Islam. So first we look at the Quran, and then the second source that we look at is the sunnah. And this is how a jurisconsult, or a person who deals with everyday matters in fiqh and the do's and don'ts in Islam, this is the second point of call. The first point of call is in the Quran, and if they don't find it in the Quran, then they look in the hadith. So there's a famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when Mu'adh bin Jabal, his companion, went to Yemen. So during the Prophet ﷺ's life, during the final year, in fact, just before he passed away, he sent different companions to different parts of the world for them to teach Islam, and for them to be judges and function as jurisconsults to like what the people needed, halal and haram, to solve issues in talaq and nikah and things like that. So this is why he sent various companions. And it's interesting that when Mu'adh bin Jabal went, this hadith is mentioned in several hadith books, the Prophet ﷺ, he's narrated to have been the one who, so when we were about to leave and we go on a journey, we take the person who's about to go on the journey, the relatives come and they meet them to the last point. For example, when we go to the airport, we take them to the last point before we can't go any further. We take them to the last point. This is how the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ took Mu'adh bin Jabal to the right on the borders edge of Medina, and he was telling him, said nasiha, he was giving him advice. He was saying, yassira wa la tu'assira wa bashira wa la tunaffira. Make things easy for the people. Make things difficult for the people. Give them glad tidings. Don't always tell them that they're going to get punished all the time. He's giving him advice on how to deal with the people. Several advice. In Mu'adh bin Jabal is mentioned that he's crying as he leaves. And the Prophet ﷺ tells him, because he's a prophet, he says, لَعَلَّكَ تَمُرُّ بِمَسْجِدِي وَبِقَبْرِي. O Mu'adh, next year when you come and visit Medina, perhaps you won't find me alive. You'll be visiting my masjid and my qabr. Right? And this was the foresight of the Prophet ﷺ. Mu'adh bin Jabal is crying, but he's saying, the Prophet ﷺ asked Mu'adh, when you are there, what are you going to use to deal with the people? How are you going to pass judgments in Islam? And then Mu'adh bin Jabal replies, he says, first I will look in the Kitabullah, right? First I will look in the book of Allah, the Quran. And the Prophet ﷺ asked him that if you don't find it, فَإِن لَمْ تَجِدْ, if you don't find it in the Quran, what would you do? Then Mu'adh bin Jabal says, I will look in the Sunnah. I will look in your Sunnah, your way of life, your sayings that have been transmitted to me. And he said, if you don't find it, then what would you do? And then Mu'adh bin Jabal says, then أجتهد بالرأي ولا آلو. Then I will use my intellect, I will use analogical reasoning, this God-given faculty of reason that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed me with. I will use that based on precedent in the Quran or Hadith. If there is no precedent in the Quran or Hadith, no previous ruling in the Quran and Hadith, I will look at the Quran and Hadith holistically, and then I will go forward in making the judgment. And so that was the third source of Islam, right? To analogical reasoning, al-qiyas. The fourth source. The third source is ijma, the consensus. But the point I was making is the Sunnah is authoritative. It's the second source of legislation is in Islam. And then we have the relationship of the Hadith and the Quran. That the Quran, in fact, some scholars even say, Sufyan al-Thawri, it's attributed to Sufyan al-Thawri, the statement, where it's actually said by his teacher, Makrul. It's mentioned that Al-Qur'anu ahwaju ila sunnah min as-sunnati ila al-kitab. The Quran is more in need of the Sunnah than the Sunnah is of the Quran. It might sound like a blasphemous statement in the beginning when you think about what? The Sunnah needs the Quran more than the Quran needs the Sunnah. What does this even mean? Right? But how this was understood is sometimes in the Quran, if you do not understand it properly, it can be a source of misguidance. And this is not my words, it's the words of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah, يُدِلُّ بِهِ مَن يَشَاءُ وَيَهْدِي بِهِ مَن يَشَاءُ. Allah misguides by means of this book many, and He guides by means of this book many. So the Quran and Hadith have a complementary relationship. They have a relationship that one sort of complements the other, right? And when they do contradict, because it at times do contradict, right? The scholars understand, okay, they look at a chain of narration. They look, is this hadith authentic or is it weak? That we're going to discuss. And then they look at, can this hadith be understood in the light of the Quran? So we'll go through this example as well. Okay. And then also differentiate authentic and fabricated hadith. That's a misconception. Of course there is, and this is the whole point of studying this. And then we have hadith categorization, hadith verification methods. And is there a way I can point on this? Okay. Can you see? Okay. So hadith categorization, you have hadith verification methods and major books of hadith. All right. Sorry? Oh, no, there is none. They've got another class upstairs. So hadith categorization, this is the science of Mustalah al-Hadith. Then you have hadith verification methods, which is the same thing, and major books of hadith. Who knows any major books of hadith apart from the Sheikh here? Muntakhab. Which Muntakhab? Yeah, that's a book of hadith that came later. Someone wrote that. Muntakhab means chosen hadith. So selected hadith from the big books. Riyadh al-Salihin is a book of hadith. Arba'in al-Nawawiyya, that's a book of hadith. The famous ones that everyone knows. So you guys know them. Go on. Start student, this brother here. But he's a bit shy, innit? Bukhari, mashallah. Jami Muslim, Sahih Bukhari. Sahih Muslim. Any others? Tirmidhi. Sunan Tirmidhi. Any others? So we three of the major six. Abu Dawood. That's number 4. Got 2 more left. This brother knows these. Yes, you do. Bismillah.
Hanafi.
No, that's a school of thought. This Ibn Majah. You know this. Ibn Majah is another book. And we have the final one, Nasai, and that completes the 6. They say the Sihah Sitta, the 6 most authentic books of hadith. But every hadith in there are the authentic. So you have Bukhari, have Sahih Muslim, Tirmidhi. मदद करो शेख उनकी मदद करो ताउन करो Abu Dawud. And the sheikh teaches the last portion of Sunan Tirmidhi. The last portion is the Shama'il. The sheikh, mashallah, teaches it. Subhanallah. So we have, which one have we got? Tirmidhi. Abu Dawud is another one.
Abu Dawud, Ibn Majah, Tirmidhi, Sahih Muslim, Bukhari.
And Nasai is the last final one. Right, from the 6 most authentic. But they're all authentic in those. Okay.
I don't think a lot of them are authentic. That's what I heard. Even Bukhari is
Yeah, so this is, inshallah, we're going to ask these questions. Next week, the week after next, entire session dedicated to Sahih al-Bukhari. Basically, when we come to the Sahih section on this, what is Sahih al-Bukhari? How is the book arranged? The life of Imam Bukhari, a brief introduction of who Imam Bukhari was, and then just on that topic. So that's the question, inshallah. Just keep it, and we're going to full session on that, inshallah, next time, in 2 weeks' time.
even covered Hadith.
Yeah. It's coming on this one. We've got even the presentation ready for your questions. Subhanallah. So then you have this. Okay. So these are just useful books in English. It's just on the science of hadith literature, but obviously I'm going to talk you through all of them. Okay. So the meaning of sunnah, we explained what sunnah means. Okay. So different sort of specialists understood the sunnah in different ways. So scholars of hadith, we mentioned what they said sunnah was. Jurists would understand the sunnah differently, what the Prophet ﷺ commanded and what he prohibited. Then you have legal theorists, which are the usulis, right? Whatever comes from the Prophet ﷺ, other than the Quran itself, in form of speech, his speech, actions, tacit approvals, this is the same as the scholars of hadith. Oh, sorry, one slide. So legal theorists. Then you have the final one, specialists in aqidah. They also, the guidance upon the Prophet ﷺ and his companions were encompassing all aspects of knowledge, belief, statements, and deeds. This is the sunnah. So they have a broad definition of what the sunnah actually is. So his statements, what he said, his actions, what he did, his approvals, what he approved of, right? His manner, like how he was, his physical appearance, like the Messenger of Allah ﷺ had approximately 20 gray hairs. Are you on the hadith yet? Didn't it? SubhanAllah, this Sheikh teaches the Shama'il, so you should know. So you have approximately 20 gray hairs the Prophet ﷺ had towards the end of life. The Prophet ﷺ had gray hairs, and then he was asked, how come you've got gray hairs? Obviously, everyone gets gray hairs, but he was asked, and the Prophet ﷺ said, Shayyabatni Hud wa akhawatuha. The Surah Hud, the mention of the punishment, the mention of the Day of Judgment in Surah Hud and the other surahs are the things that made me have white hairs. SubhanAllah, this is the Prophet ﷺ's even his approach to the Quran and his understanding to the Quran actually turned his hairs white. So, and then you have the biography of the Prophet ﷺ. Oh, yeah, the biography of the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ married Khadija when he was 25 years old. Sheikh Muhammad, is that transmitted authentically? How old was Khadija radiallahu ta'ala? 40, right? So according to the most famous. Okay, this is one point that we mentioned. I'll mention to you guys here. Oh, it's a bit advanced, but because the Sheikh needs this advanced knowledge. So sometimes the most famous thing isn't the most authentic thing. So we have Ashhur, the most famous opinion that everyone thinks is this, but that's not necessarily the most authentic. Famous example is, this is one example. Another example is the birthday of the Prophet ﷺ. When was the actual birthday? So the scholars of Sirah, they say it was the 12th of Rabiul Awwal, right? And that's when the shuyukh here do the Mawlid, the black man, yeah? So, but in the most authentic opinion is the 8th of Rabiul Awwal, right? But the most famous is the 12th. So not necessarily the most famous is the most authentic, usually. So you have to understand it like that.
Is it also controversial age of Aisha?
Yeah, age of Aisha, exactly. That's a very good example as well. So some scholars mention that the Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha was 6 in Bukhari, 6 years old, 9 years old, and then some scholars mention she was 18, right? They do have the various proofs and stuff like that. And interestingly, I think Sheikh Uthman, in a few weeks, we're planning that he does a talk on just the age of Aisha, the various opinions in Islam and how we understand them. Inshallah, so that's in the pipeline. Okay. So you have a religious matter, then you have there's a need and it is possible, so nothing preventing is action. So this is the definition of sunnah that we have. So what does hadith mean? Hadith is opposite of qadim. We mentioned that something that happens new, the linguistic meanings, etc. Technically, according to the muhaddithin, what it stands for, that which is transmitted from the Prophet ﷺ, mentioned that relationship between Quran and hadith, mentioned that what components are there of hadith. This is, again, I'll mention this again. So Al-Humaydi, Abdullah bin Zubayr narrated to us that Sufyan narrated to him, that Yahya bin Sa'id al-Ansari narrated to him, that Muhammad ibn Ibrahim at-Taymi narrated to him, that he heard Alqama ibn Waqqas al-Laysi say, that he heard Abu Hafs Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu say, I heard the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying, actions are according to intentions. So which bit is the chain of narrations? Chain of narration. Which bit of this is the chain of narration? Which color? The red bit. And the blue bit is what the Prophet ﷺ said, the matanul hadith.
That's a sanad, right?
Yeah, sanad. That's a sanad, and this is the matan of hadith. This is the actual text of hadith. So then you have these all the sahaba. So for example, all of these companions heard it from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So okay, we can skip these because we're going to go back to them. The authority of sunnah. Okay, how is sunnah authoritative? So what I'm going to do is, okay, these things are quite, we can go back to them. How the importance of sunnah, how it was preserved and things like that. Because we already started the terminologies, I think we'll just continue with them, and when we finish them, we'll go back to this, but it's quite long. Okay, here it is. This is basically what we did week 1 and week 2, but it's in the presentation form. So how did the science of ilm, the science of nomenclature, how did it actually come about? Is there an asal, is there a source for it in the Quran? And the answer is yes. The ayah of Surah Hujurat, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن جاءكم فاسق بنبأ فتبينوا, O you who believe, if there comes to you a disobedient one with information, then you should investigate. So this is where the scholars of hadith originated the science of mustalah al-hadith. Just checking the time. Okay. And then we have the hadith, Allah illuminates the one who acquired information for us, and then he reports it to others. This brother Ishtiyaqi is he's very proficient now in the virtues of hadith, isn't it? The virtues of studying hadith. Why do we study hadith? So inshallah, if you ask him later, he'll be able to explain to you. But the main virtue of the science of mustalah al-hadith is the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah illuminates the face of the person who hears the hadith, and they propagate the hadith just as they heard it. So this is an illumination, a spiritual illumination that the person has. And then we talked about these several books, Ram Hormuzi's book and all these books about Mustalah al-Hadith, which is basically for these brothers here, but it's not really that important. And then, okay, then we talked about the initial terminologies. So Murad, you pay attention here. This is the main things that we covered last time. So a sanad is literally a support, it's a chain of narration. Matan is the text of hadith. Hadith is actually literally means something new, but it's a statement, action, approval, or description ascribed to the Prophet. Khabar, some people say it's the same as hadith, some people say it's more general. Anything can be khabar, news, any type of news. Yeah, so the matan is just the text of the hadith, but the matan and the sanad will be hadith. Yeah? Athar means a remnant, literally something that's left behind. Some people say it's the same as hadith. Which scholar said athar and hadith are synonymous? Based on the title of his book. Imam Tahawi. So Imam Tahawi wrote a book called Sharh Ma'ani al-Athar. So the explanation of the meaning of the athar. And in it included hadith as well. So he must use athar in the general term. So hadith and non-hadith also. So then we have isnad, we said what that means. Musnad, we mentioned that any book with organized in terms of the Sahabi. So for example, Abu Huraira, all Abu Huraira's hadith are mentioned. Then Zubayr ibn Awwam, all his hadith are mentioned. Aisha, all her hadith are mentioned together. Then it's organized in terms of which Sahabi narrates them. These books are called Musnad. In terms of hadith, how they reached us, there's two types. So you have hadith mutawatir. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. You have hadith mutawatir, right? Which was hadith mutawatir? These brothers, mashallah, on it.
At least one.
Yeah, so mass transmitted hadith. In hadith mutawatir, what's the probability of hadith mutawatir not being correct?
Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. Spare pen chair?
Sorry.
Allah, inshallah. The brother always has a pen. Today, no pen? MashaAllah. The person who's always prepared is not prepared today, unfortunately. Subhanallah. What is- Okay. So based on how the hadith reached us, we have two types: mutawatir, mass transmitted. As a question, what is the probability of hadith mutawatir being wrong? Impossible. It's 0.01% chance. That's why they say it's very difficult for hadith to be mutawatir, right? But that's why the definitions must be different of those people who said there's 200 mutawatir hadith. For example, Imam Suyuti, he compiled a book, right? Just compiling mutawatir hadith. Mutawatir means mass transmitted. For example, China exists, but you've never been. Yeah, but not everyone's going to come and conspire together just to trick you that China doesn't exist, right? So this is an inconceivable thing that they're lying. So that's mutawatir. Then ahad, they said that it's anything other than mutawatir. So, yeah.
Sunnah, because the Quran is the book, and then hadith is sunnah.
Okay, so this brother will tell you what is the Quran. Is it mutawatir or ahad? Mutawatir. Because so many people have transmitted the Quran that it's impossible for them to unite upon a lie.
What I mean is that the Quran it came to Muhammad
Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, yeah.
From Angel Gabriel, which is Jibreel. So this is, I feel it's different from, because hadith is what Muhammad what Muhammad said, which is different to the Quran Kareem. This is like from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala direct.
Yeah.
But this is like, emulate Prophet Muhammad.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, it's correct what you're saying. And the brother asked before, what's the difference between Hadith Qudsi and Quran? Is there a difference? It's coming in the slides, inshallah. So, mutawatir hadith, there's two types of mutawatir: mutawatir lafzi, mutawatir ma'nawi. Mutawatir lafzi is the hadith mutawatir in wording. Just as he worded it, all of you transmit, right? 10 people transmit, and then they transmit to 10 people. There's an exponential growth. That's what, in terms of wording. In terms of meaning, it can be qadaya mukhtalifa. It can be different times that people narrated a certain thing. So, for example, it's narrated that the Prophet ﷺ raised his hands in dua, but at different times. That's definitely the Prophet ﷺ did that, but at different times. But it's mentioned in numerous hadith. No, just the raising hands in dua. And just normal raising hands in dua. So definitely the Prophet ﷺ did that, but he might have done it on different occasions. But all them narrations, they are all authentic. They come together and they make strength with each other and become mutawatir. But it's not the same mutawatir, because again, the word is subjective. It's not the same as sort of the Quran in terms of its applicability, right? Then you have the ahad based on number of roots. Then you have ahad is anything which is not mutawatir. But some scholars include the third category is hadith mashhur. But then they say mashhur is part of ahad. This is a bit difficult, but inshallah with the diagrams you'll be able to understand.
Can I ask one question about, so when we salah,
Yeah.
And we try to emulate Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we hold like this. When we're on the floor, we put our right foot out and we sit on our left.
Yeah.
So what is that hadith or is that sunnah? What is this?
So you just missed the definitions
Oh,
because
sorry.
no worries. But the sunnah encompasses, according to the hadith scholars, different types of scholars would interpret the sunnah in different ways. But the hadith scholars say the sunnah is the sayings, the actions, the tacit approvals, which is what the Prophet approved of, what happened in his presence, and he didn't say it's wrong. And the fourth thing is his physical description. These are the four things that encompass the sunnah.
So it's sayings, approvals, and then the last one, or the third one?
Tacit approvals, sayings, actions.
Actions, and then the fourth one again, sorry.
Shama'il.
So I've got sayings, approvals, actions, and appearance, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
His physical traits.
So,
It'll be no worries. It'll be available to you, this thing,
okay.
afterwards. So even if you
I'll
wanna
stop asking.
no. Ask questions for clarification.
Okay, but
As we
also
go
just
along.
based on what you're talking
Yeah.
about now, sorry to get backwards, guys.
Yeah. So
Shall I repeat?
into so you have, based on authenticity, this is a big diagram, right? But we're gonna go one by one, inshallah. You have sahih, the types of sahih, are they implemented or not? If a hadith is sahih, doesn't mean you have to implement it, not necessarily. If it contradicts something that's higher than it, then you don't. And then you have the different types of omission in isnad. You have the hadith mu'allaq. What's hadith mu'allaq? Quick overview, and then we're going to go into depth. Hadith mu'allaq, yeah. Hungry. Dangling. Yeah, it's literally means dangling. Hadith mu'allaq is when Bukhari or someone says, Qala Rasulullah sallam. So there's no chain between Bukhari and the Rasulullah sallam. That's hadith mu'allaq. Then you have the mursal, hadith mursal. The Sahabas cut off, so the Tabi'i narrates from the Prophet ﷺ. You have the Hadith Mu'dal. Don't worry, we're gonna every single definition will continue, but just testing this brother here. Mu'dal, there's two omissions, and then you have the Munqati in the chain of narration. We're gonna mention every single one in depth, but just testing this brother because he knows it quite well. Yeah, we're gonna cover the examples. Yeah. Then we have the Hadith Mudallas. Mudallas kya hai? Yeah, so the student misses out his teacher and he says he heard it from the teacher above. Could be for various reasons. Interesting one I read in this one. Came prepared today. Look how many books I got. So in this one, this is actually a good one. Manhajul Hadith fi Tasheel Ilm al Hadith. They mentioned some motives why Tadlis would take place. One of the motives were that Hassan Basri used to narrate on the virtues of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. But because of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, he used to miss his sheikh out, right? So this was one of the reasons. Again, we're going to go into that in depth. Mursal, Khafi, Mu'an'an. Mu'an'an mentioned twice. What is Hadith Mu'an'an? So, okay, who is the Hadith attributed to? This was the question, brother in the blue. So, Hadith, if it's Hadith is attributed to Allah, then it's known as Hadith Qudsi. Right? If you heard this term before, Hadith Qudsi, people say there are about 100. So the wording is from the Prophet, but the message is from Allah, right? Ya ibadi kullukum ra'in illa kasawtu. So all of you are naked except for those who have clothed. All of you are hungry except for those who I have fed. These are hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, that the Prophet ﷺ saying, "Oh my servants," but it's actually a message from Allah. How do you make the distinction between hadith Qudsi and Quran? We're going to come to that. The second type is hadith marfu. A marfu means that which is elevated, that which is raised, meaning that is from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Some hadith marfu, not necessarily the Prophet ﷺ says it, because in the hadith terminology we'll understand that sometimes a companion might say something, but it's غير مدرك بالقياس, which means it's not, he can't get it from it, he can't understand this through his own reason, through his own intellect. He couldn't understand this. For example, things to do with Jannah and Jahannam, right? Things when a Sahabi talks about it, they say that's hukm al-rafa. It's still marfu from the Prophet ﷺ. Then you have hadith mawquf, which is basically saying of a companion. Then you have hadith maqtu', which is the saying of a tabi'i. So the people who came after the companions. So again,
just to back to Marfu,
yeah.
wasn't very clear. So when you say it need not be always what Prophet Sallallahu said.
Yeah. So okay, what I meant by that is there are exceptions, because marfu is what the Prophet ﷺ said, what he did, what he approved of. For example, if they said, again, it will come in detail when we're going through the different, because one by one is going to come on slides. But this we're just going to give an overview in the beginning. So marfu is basically when a companion says, from the sunnah is this. I saw the Prophet ﷺ pray like this, right? That's marfu, right? Marfu can also be actions are according to intentions. The Prophet ﷺ said that. He walked in a certain way. That's marfu. About him. Yeah. So not always, but what I meant is not always it's just what the Prophet ﷺ says. Because sometimes a companion might say something and they might not attribute it to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. But this isn't something that they could work out with their own reason, with their own faculty of reason. It could be to do with Qiyamah, to do with Jannah, to do with Jahannam, right? So these sort of things, we know that the companions couldn't have got that except from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Hence, this will fall into hukm al-rafa. It will be considered rafa, even though it's mawquf, even though it's from the companion, right?
I have a question.
Yep.
Islam was about you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. With the hadith and except with from Allah to Prophet, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the marfu to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all the rest actually slightly incorrect, because it's just meant to be Islam is you and Allah direct. This is why we don't. It's like Catholicism. They have the Pope. This is why we don't have a Pope, right? Because there's no one person that is, between ourselves and
Of course.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Very interesting.
So this is one question that I'd like to know about hadith. And for me, from those four that you've said, it's the Qudsi and the Marfu that I would personally take and use.
Yep.
The other two I'd be slightly skeptical of, because of course there's qadr.
Yeah.
And everything is qadr, and the companions, of course.
Yeah.
They were, the first people of Islam. So they are important. But most important for me is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Quran, and then it's Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and all the Anbiya, all Isa. So with this maqtu and the maqtu, what's your take on that? Sorry if I'm saying a controversial subject.
No, it's not controversial. I welcome controversy in this class, isn't it? That's why we delete all the videos afterwards. Brother knows. So again, it's an interesting question, but we answered it before.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
we said the sources of Islam, there are four sources of Islam: the Quran, the Sunnah, analogical reasoning, which has precedent in the Quran and Sunnah. If there's no precedent, then we have, then you have an ijma, so a consensus between people.
Yes.
But then, mawquf. So just say something about the deen from their own knowledge. Not really. It's from the deen. The only two legislative sources are the Quran and Sunnah. إذا وقعنا في التنازع فنرجع إلى الله وإلى رسوله. So when we fall into any sort of dispute, then we go back to Allah and His Messenger. Allah says in the Quran, يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم فإن تنازعتم في شيء. When you, oh, were you asking questions?
No.
All right, okay. All right, okay, inshallah.
Thank you for that. It's just, this is one thing about how this is the love of Allah in my heart.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that it's very, very pure.
Yeah.
And I just think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Nabi Muhammad and all the Anbiya, they're all very important, especially Nabi Isa.
Of course.
Very important.
Of course.
So
I think the in terms of the epistemological weight, what weight the Sunnah has in the light of the Quran, we're going to talk about that in a few weeks' time. But now we're only talking about the classifications of the certain things, right? So mawquf hadith doesn't mean that a companion can just say something, or someone who came later. This is obviously no. It has to be from Allah and His Messenger. But when it was documented at that point. you understand? It's not necessarily they came up with something. It could be that they came up with a saying, but that saying is not attributed to Allah and His Messenger. We can't base our deen on it. It's not a source of legislation. There are only two primary sources of legislation. That is the Quran and Sunnah, right? So this is, we were just mentioning the different, we just mentioned, no worries, inshallah. We're just mentioning the different classifications of things. So how the hadith reached us, we have mutawatir, mashhur, and ahad. Mutawatir in terms of wording and meaning, we explained that. Ahad, there's three types, which I wanted to go over today. We'll go over these today and then we'll close, inshallah. So a mutawatir hadith is transmitted by such a large number of scholars, hadith transmitters, that in each generation that they could have united upon a lie. So it was a good diagram. Oh yeah, here. Okay, it's coming. The diagram's coming. Yeah, that's So such a large number of people that they could not have united upon a lie. Right? So then we have 4 conditions. We mentioned them last time for mutawatir. Large number of people in each generation. What does that mean? You'll know from the diagram. Is a report, again, impossible for all them to agree and fabricate. The report is based upon sense perception, meaning it's not khilaful qiyas. Okay, then you have points to consider. A large number of narrators leading to definitive knowledge without specified number. Reports based on knowledge and not conjecture. Condition fulfilled in all layers of the sanad. So what does layers of the sanad mean? We'll come to that. Imam Khatib al-Baghdadi's definition, it's the same. Again, number necessary to, okay. So then the brother mentioned, is there a particular number that we need for the hadith to be considered a hadith mutawatir? So some scholars did stipulate a number, but in reality, there is not a fixed number. Some people said 8, 12, 40, 313. That's one number because of the Ashab al-Badr.
Is it really every one of us, when we read something, our intuition will tell us if this is right or not?
Okay, so
Even
do we?
We are mu'mineen, we
Yeah.
are salawat, and we do all our 5 pillars. When we read the Quran. So when we read something, it's like reading a newspaper.
Yeah.
You go, is that true or not? Right?
So you're saying the method
you
of
have suspicion on something. This is why I agree with the majority of this very fixed number.
Yeah.
If you read something and you feel in your heart that it's right and you have the love of Allah, that should help you understand whether that is.
But I
Understand the numbers, it's important.
Something even there's a hadith which is so popular, but we think it could be a mutawatir.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is actually very interesting point of ahad. If the ahad is so popular, that could it be mutawatir? Again, you'll understand through the diagrams in a second. So again, you have what you consider in the hadith. So the scholar gives an analogy of hunger. When you look at hunger, you consider different aspects of the hunger. You look at the quantity of food, right, that you want to consume. Look at the type of food. So the quantity of food is the number of reporters. Type of food is a type of reporters. Are they trustworthy? Are they the type of person? Okay, that's the trustworthy aspect. Type of information being reported. Then mood of the person is other influencing factors. Okay, so does a mutawatir lafzi hadith exist? Again, last time I told you, according to some people like Ibn Salah and Nawawi, there are very few mutawatir hadith. According to Ibn Hajar and others, As-Suyuti, the Sheikh Muhammad Ja'far al-Kattani, the Moroccan scholar who compiled the book of mutawatir hadith, about 200. But obviously their definitions for mutawatir, the threshold will be slightly lower. Because if you object to the mutawatir hadith, it's the same as if you object to the Quran in terms of applicability, right? In terms of going out of the fold of Islam. So Ibn Hibban says that the mutawatir hadith does not exist. And other scholars, the Shatibi, he said they're only hypothetical, right? And then, okay, now we have mutawatir chain. Now I can explain to you properly, okay? So it's the green here is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The blue is the companions. Can you see such a large group of companions narrated from him? Radiallahu ta'ala alayhim ajma'in. And then they had a lot of students as well, the orange. They would be the tabi'is. And then the other shade of blue would be the tabi'is, the sub companions. And then can you see there's exponential growth there? in terms of it being narrated. So this would be known as hadith mutawatir. So then you have two categories of hadith mutawatir: lafzi in terms of wording. For example, man kadhaba alayya muta'ammidan falyatabawwa maq'adahu min an-nar. And then you have mutawatir ma'nawi. Again, what is the ruling regarding that? You have to act upon it. Ilm al-dharuri. If a hadith is found to be mutawatir, right? There is no difference of opinion in this. For example, the rak'ah of prayer. No one disagrees. No one says Fajr is 3 rak'ah, 5 rak'ah. No. This is mutawatir. There's no disagreement on the matter. In terms, you don't even have to check if it's authentic or not. So then you have two types of tawatur. Tawatur mutlaq. This is a subcondition, a subcategorization. So if the conditions of tawatur are found in all layers of the isnad. So if you look here, so if in every single generation, so in the first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one, fifth one, if it's such a large number in every chain, this is called hadith tawatur ala al-itlaq, absolutely. And conditions of tawatur within the sanad is tawatur nisbi, so partial. So in the first, if you look just in the first generation, if it fulfills tawatur, it'll be up to that, like that one. So now, which was the point of today, was ahad. So what time is it?
So it's tonight.
Okay, we'll spend about 7-8 minutes to finish wrapping up on ahad, inshallah. Mosid. Okay, Mosid. Change on this one as well. Maybe next time link this in it. Tech quiz. All right. So then you have ahad. Ahad, we said the definition of ahad is those traditions that do not conform to mutawatir and does not constitute to ilm al-dharuri definitive knowledge. It's speculative in terms of its applicability. So you do not have to act upon it if it's not mutawatir. If it's not mutawatir, I mean, I don't mean you don't act upon it. I mean, it's in the debating chamber now. Now the scholars will look at this hadith, look at this snapshot of reality, and then after that assess it with the other sources of Islam, the Quran or the hadith, which are above it, etc. So what is legal status of hadith, of ahad? Ruling based on study. So you have to study what it is in terms of applicability, how you can apply it. There are 3 types of ahad. The hadith scholars mention mashhur, aziz, and gharib. So what is the mashhur hadith? So the mashhur hadith, so some they say the mashhur and mustafid are the same thing. That's why in Hidayah, right? You guys did the Shafi Hidayah, innit? The Hanafi Hidayah, the Shafi Madrasa. So in Hidayah, they say that the masal al-khuf, not masal al-khuf, there was a masala, it was a masal al-khufayn. They said the hadith here are mustafid. So by mustafid, they meant mashhur. So mashhur is basically those narrations which have a chain consisting of no less than 3 narrators in each generation, but that does not reach the level of tawatur. Again, with the diagram, here you'll understand. So here, the green is the Prophet ﷺ again, blue is the companions that narrated from him. It wasn't a large group. It was those 3 companions that narrated from him, and second generation either. So this is the hadith mashhur, going back to the definition again. Those narrations which have a chain consisting of no less than 3 narrators in each generation, but it does not reach the level of tawatur. An example is Allah does not make knowledge to vanish from His servants by itself. He did so by taking it from the scholars, by uplifting the scholars. So this is a famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that he said, إن الله لا يقبض العلم انتزاعا ينتزعه من صدور العلماء ولكن يقبض العلم بقبض العلماء حتى إذا لم يبقى عالما اتخذ الناس رؤاسا جهالا فسئلوا فأفتوا بغير علم فضلوا وأضلوا. I would have explained the hadith a bit more, but basically this hadith says that Allah doesn't take knowledge from the earth by taking the books. He takes the scholars of knowledge, and this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes knowledge from the earth. And towards the end of time, there will be people that when they make the leaders will be ignorant, and they will be asked questions and they will give a fatwa, right, without knowledge, and they will be misguided themselves and they will misguide others as well. فَضَلُّوا وَضَلُّوا. So this basically is an example of hadith mashhur. Some people say mustafid is synonymous with mashhur. Some people say it's more specific than mashhur. A similar number of reporters from the beginning to the end of this isnad. So mashhur is 3 companions, at least 3 companions narrate it, but it's not a large number. if you can see. So, and then in the second generation, so after the companions, if you can see the orange one, the orange boxes, they are sort of the next generation. So this is hadith mashhur. It's not at the level of mutawatir. It's at least three in each generation. So according to the Hanafiya, the definition is of mashhur is slightly different. The definition of mashhur according to the Hanafiya, mashhur in the Arabic language just means famous. It means famous. So what is hadith mashhur? In the language, people say mashhur, this hadith is mashhur. What does that mean? Hadith is mashhur in this place. Hadith is mashhur according to the muhaddithin, according to the fuqaha, according to the jurists, according to the scholars of hadith. What is hadith mashhur? According to who? So the Hanafi scholars said, hadith mashhur is transmitted by a large number of scholars in each generation, except for the generation of the companions. So, okay. Yeah, so basically what Hanafi scholars say hadith mashhur is, so you have, this is the Prophet ﷺ. So if you just have one companion narrating from him, but then after that you can have many narrating from him. Yeah, this hadith mashhur according to the Hanafi scholars. So they understood the hadith mashhur slightly differently, but I had to just cover that up a bit. So hadith mashhur according to the Hanafi is that, so legal status in between, so hadith mashhur is in between mutawatir and ahad in terms of its applicability, and we're going to elaborate on that further next time. But it leads to ilm at-tamanina, contentment. That's what they mentioned, that you should be content that this is a hadith from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then Abu Bakr al-Jassas al-Razi, who was an early Hanafi scholar, theologian as well, he considered the hadith mashhur to be a branch of mutawatir, right? So it would be in terms of applicability. So mashhur, I said, non-technical meanings. People just say a mashhur is well known according to the scholars. For example, that hadith about tajweed, you know, rubba qari'in yaqra'u al-Qur'an wal-Qur'anu yal'inu. That some people read the Qur'an, a lot of people read the Qur'an, but the Qur'an curses them. In terms of its authenticity, inauthentic. It's not really authentic. It's not reaches with a chain, but it's become famous when among the scholars of tajweed, right? So there are certain people might say this hadith is mashhur, but they don't mean the technical meaning of mashhur. Like I explained last time, yeah. If I can say one word to different people, it might mean different things. For example, what was the example I gave last time? Site. So if I say site to a builder, what does he mean? The building site. If I say it to a web designer, what do we mean? Website. So I can say the same word mean different things. Likewise, mashhur can be the same thing, but yeah, exactly. Yeah. So just try meaning, you know, the layers. It just keeps on going. So again, mashhur, non-technical meaning, well known to all, well known amongst the jurist scholars, well known amongst the scholars of legal theory, usulis, well known. Give me an example of a scholar hadith and well known amongst the usulis. رفع عن أمتي الخطأ والنسيان, that mistakes and forgetfulness have been uplifted from my ummah. That's one famous according to the usulis. Well known among general people, that's hadith. So aziz linguistic means strong. Aziz, وهو العزيز الغفور, it's the quality of Allah. Aziz means strong, rare or strong. Technically, the hadith aziz هو الصفة هو ألا يقل رواته عن اثنين في جميع طبقات السند, that the narrators of this are not less than two in every generation. Remember the first generation, second generation, the boxes, that means generations. So no less than two. So those hadiths in which there are no fewer than two narrators as part of the chain and does not reach level of mashhur. An example of this is the famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ narrated by Anas ibn Malik. Shaykhan narrated. Who are the two sheikhs? Who's the two sheikhs when we talk about hadith? Bukhari and Muslim, mashallah. So I said even this word, if you say the two sheikhs, if you say to different people, you mean different things. If you say to the muhaddithin, they mean Bukhari and Muslim. If you say to the scholars of Aqidah, they mean Abu Bakr and Umar. If you say to Hanafi scholars, who do they mean? Abu Yusuf and Abu Hanifa. They are technical terms. When I say the two sheikhs, it means particular two sheikhs. Right? For example, if I say in this masjid, if I say the two imams, who do I mean? Sheikh Uthman and Sheikh Muhammad, right? So, but if I say Imam somewhere else in a different mosque, hold on 1 second. Oh. Yeah, if I say Imam in a different mosque, it means different people, right? So, not necessarily by the same word, I mean the same thing, right? It can be because of the context. You understand? Because of different contexts, things are understood differently. So that's why, that's the whole point of me mentioning the two sheikhs. So they narrate a hadith where Prophet said, "La yu'minu ahadukum hatta akuna habba ilayhi min walidihi wa waladihi wa nas ajma'in." That none of you become true believers except that I become more beloved to him than his parents, his children, and all of the people. This hadith, Aziz, from the Ahad category. Is that possible? So because the Prophet ﷺ uses this as the condition of faith, La yu'minu ahadukum. None of you become believers. So then anyone who's not in this category, are they unbelievers? Then is this hadith wrong? Bring intuition, but what does the intuition say about this one?
My intuition is telling me that it's about how strong your belief is. It's not actually about if you believe or not. It's how strong your belief is. If you have Nabi Muhammad that is close to you, of course Allah is the top, but like we do it in our prayer in the Shahad, we talk about the Prophet Muhammad, so it's very important we talk about the Prophet Ibrahim. So we have my intuition telling that it's not about a believer. It's about how strong. If you're really, really strong, then Prophet Muhammad will be in your heart closer to your parents. You can still be a believer. You can still be a Muslim.
Yeah.
No problem. But this is, again, the Quran is the first book, and the Hadith is secondary. So if you believe in Allah, with the Quran, you're what the five pillars,
yeah.
And I see that you are a believer. But that thing there, I see what you mean. It's like a contradiction.
So the authenticity of the belief. How authentic is your belief?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it can't
on this occasion, your intuition is right. On this occasion, alhamdulillah. But we don't scrutinize hadith based on intuition. Because this is the whole point of studying this, right? Yeah, this is why we're studying this system of scrutinizing hadith. This is a particular system. It's not through our own intuition. But on this instant, the scholars understood this as incomplete faith, as in your faith is not at a complete state. You've still got room for improvement. For example, how the Prophet ﷺ said, La imana liman la amanata la. The person who has no amana, no trust, then they don't have any faith. But does that mean they're not Muslim? No, it means they don't have complete faith. So again, that was a hadith, Aziz, an example of a hadith that was considered Aziz. What's Aziz? Two narrators in the first tabaqa. And then after that, there can be many. But it's just in the first at the time. Here's example of a, sorry.
You mentioned that there is another, like, is it the same?
Which one? Sorry. Same understanding of this one. Again, all of these ones, we don't say this person is a kafir. It's very difficult in Islam to get someone out of the fold of Islam. It's very difficult, right? Yeah. Exactly, it's a big problem. Yeah.
Tantamount to,
there's a hadith in Sahih Muslim. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's really important. There's a hadith in Sahih Muslim actually. إذا قال أحد لأحد أنت كافر, right? If a person says to another person that you are kafir and they are not a kafir, right? ارتدت عليه إن لم يكن صاحبه كذلك. It comes back. The kufr returns to them. إذا رمى رجلا بالكفر أو الفسق ارتدت عليه إن لم يكن صاحبه كذلك. رواه مسلم. This hadith in Sahih Muslim mentioned that the kufr returns to you. So this is a really important point. So again, hadith Aziz is basically, here's the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the green box, and then you have the two companions that narrate from him, and then it can be famous or not. The final one, yeah, it's the final one. Okay, we'll leave it at this final one. I'll explain it, inshallah. We'll call it a day because we've been going for over an hour, right? Example of, okay, hadith gharib. So you might get it. If the first one was mashhur, that was 3 companions, and then it became famous. The second one was Aziz, that was 2 companions that narrated it and then became famous. What do you think hadith gharib would be, the third category? 1. So if you look at it, hadith Aziz, Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then 2 people narrate it, right? These are the 2 companions, and then they narrated to 1 or however many, right? They narrated to 1, and then it becomes famous afterwards. So this is Aziz, and then you have gharib. Gharib in the dictionary, gharib was gharib, strange. But that's in Urdu, gharib means something else. What does gharib mean? Miskin. It means faqir. Yeah. But that's why some words can have the same thing, can have the same pronunciation, the same spelling, everything, but in different languages they mean different things, right? That's why. What is it? Gharib. What's the hadith about the gharib? In al-Islam bada'a ghariban fasayaudu kama bada'a. Islam started as strange and it will return to how it was. Okay, so it's gharib. I think that's actually a gharib translation as well. But anyway, the technical definition of that is a hadith which has a chain containing only one narrator in at least one generation. So some people said that fard is another word for gharib as well. So you have gharib mutlaq, gharib nisbi. So gharib mutlaq it refers to hadith which has a single narrator at the start of the isnad. So single narrator there, one narrator only, right? And then after that single narrator at the start of the sanad. The gharib nisbi is a hadith which has a single narrator in at least one generation after the companions. So you have, here's the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then you have the companions, then you have their companions, and then you have their companions, the tabu tabi'in, then it becomes famous, right? But before that, it's only one narrator that narrates it. This is the weakest type of ahad. And this is the ahad that Imam Tirmidhi talks about when he says, Hada hadithun sahihun gharibun. This hadith is sahih, but it's also gharib. So a hadith can be authentic because this person a sahabi is authentic. We'll come to the status of them, the narrators, but a sahabi is authentic. This old person can also be authentic. So can this person, right? So the hadith is sahih, but there's a probability that they may have heard it wrong. Right? This is why they need a separate category for ahad and tawatur. Do you understand now? That's why if a hadith is found to be sahih, not necessarily it's applicable. Right? You have to. Sorry? Why weren't the hadith written down? In the beginning, we're going to cover, there's a whole look, the whole presentation. I skipped the first 50 slides were based on when the hadith were written. And I even mentioned in the beginning of this class now, La taktubu anni illa al-Quran, that in the beginning the Prophet ﷺ said, don't write from me except the Quran. Because people would write the Quran along with the explanation, right? And then there would be a confusion. But when the people understood the distinction between the literary style of the Quran and other literature, then says things like usloob, then there was permission granted to write the hadith.
So that was directly asking Prophet Muhammad, is it okay for us to say,
yeah.
Is it okay for us to write this?
Yeah.
Say yes or no.
So yeah, okay. Okay, this is an example of hadith gharib, which is the famous one. Innamal a'malu binniyat. This is actually a hadith gharib, but they say that even some scholars say that all of them changed together. Some people even said it reaches tawatur. This hadith of innamal a'malu binniyat, but it doesn't really, according to the definitions. So example of gharib is the Prophet ﷺ, 2 people narrated from him, Anas and Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhum. Qatada narrated from Anas, so there was a single link there. This is gharib nisbi, and then Shu'bah narrated from Qatada, Shu'bah and Sa'id. Okay, so this is the final one. There's different types of gharib, other types of gharib, reported by only one narrator exclusively or from one particular sheikh. So when a hadith scholar narrates from one particular sheikh, it's known as hadith gharib. Again, another type of hadith gharib that some scholars understood is gharib hadith is one hadith narrated in a particular land. So Shamiyin, Ahlul Sham narrate this hadith, gharib. Final one, what is reported by the people of one land from a person of another land whose own people don't have the report or not in authentic form. This is hadith gharib. And this is the final, this is basically a breakdown of what we're talking about. So you have fard, which is the individual hadith. Fard can be individual, gharib, which is in terms of its transmitter, in terms of the companion. So in terms of its transmitter, you can have fard with opposing hadith. So for example, if a stronger hadith opposes it, this hadith says X, this other hadith opposes it, says Y. So is it a stronger hadith that opposes it? So if there is a stronger hadith that opposes this particular narration, we call it munkar, or we call it shadh as well. Shadh means rarity, but these are terms that we'll talk about. Then fard without opposing hadith. If this hadith is ahad and it doesn't have any hadith opposing it, you have it mutlaq and you have nisbi. So mutlaq is absolutely, there's no other hadith opposing it. And then you have a nisbi where there is a hadith opposing it, but then this hadith can be from a particular region, by one particular transmitter, or by a particular region of people, they object to it, and they can have motives to object to it. For example, the people of Ahlul Iraq, they pray in a certain way, right? So if someone narrates this hadith, they are all going to object to it, because they all took their knowledge from certain companions, so they wouldn't have heard that. It would have been very sort of strange for them, and literally is gharib. Okay, so this was, I know, very difficult walkthrough, but again, the terminology does slightly get easier from now on. But it's just a distinction between mutawatir and ahad. And then now it's going on to Sahih, Hasan, basically the actual categorization of hadith. This is understanding the hadith. This could all be authentic in terms of transmission, but this is in terms of applicability, how we apply the certain hadith. This is how we do it. And inshallah, next time we'll start with the Sahih hadith. What is a Sahih hadith? Alhamdulillah, we finally got there somehow. Right? وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين. Any questions? I got my MashaAllah.